Okay. Welcome, one and all, to yet another episode of Whick TV, a cross-ideological space where we come together to talk about issues both political and cultural, from the silly to the serious. Gang, have we got a show for you today? The first thing I will say, before I say anything else, is we are back on Twitch. You may have heard that I got suspended, that I got banned. It's true, I did. But then I worked a little bit of my white boy magic. I used my cis hetero white male powers, okay? And I gave them a good stern talking to over there, and they rescinded everything. Full Whick victory, 100% return on investment here. They overturned the suspension. They removed all strikes from my channel. They apologized. So welcome, Twitch viewers. I know I missed you, but we're back, and here we are. But today's topic, let's get to it. Recently, Brianna Wu, our guest tonight, went on the Triggernometry podcast. For those who are not aware, it's a more center, right-leaning podcast that talks to people from across the political spectrum and has sometimes interesting, sometimes kind of boring conversations. I watched it. I enjoyed it. And I reached out to my friend here, Brianna Wu, to come talk to us about it, and that's what we'll do. But again, before we get into it, just full disclosure, I do get a check from Progressive Victory. Okay, Josiah
had
gets a
nothing
check.
to do with tonight.
Yeah,
nothing. Well, I didn't ask for this topic. You invited me.
Yes, that's true. And Brianna isn't paid by Progressive Victory, as far as I know. So here we are. Okay. Let's get into it. So I guess first of all, let me ask you, Brianna. How did this happen? Like, who reached out to who? Tell us about, like, kind of the lead up to the experience of being on the Triggernometry podcast. Go ahead.
Sure. So before we get started, I just want everyone out there to know I'm recovering from surgery right now. I'm a little bit weak. So if I'm a little bit dyspeptic today, it's not because Whick or Josiah are boring me. It's because I'm not quite myself yet. So I would love a little bit of grace today. So the way this happened is, obviously after October 6th, I've been a lot more pro-Israel than a lot of people on the progressive side, and it has opened up the doors to a lot of people that I've been talking to. So Constantine over at Triggernometry is one of the friends that I've made in the aftermath. I don't agree with him on everything. If you looked at our DMs, you'd see me taking him to task on trans stuff he said, disagreeing with him on many of his political views, but it's respectful, right? So he invited me on. I thought it was really, really important to go there and kind of counter some of the things he said about trans rights with some of his other guests there. So I felt a responsibility to go on and kind of represent a different point of view. So I said yes.
Okay. So our other guest tonight is Josiah from Pondering Politics, who I reached out to as well, because I wanted to get his opinion on some of the things that were talked about. So Josiah, did you watch the episode? What are some of your thoughts, I guess, after
I
seeing
did.
the show?
Yeah, I did watch the episode. So a couple of things. I too am affiliated with Progressive Victory. I was actually recruited into Progressive Victory by the guest of honor herself, Brianna Wu.
True story.
It is, and that was actually the genesis of the interaction between us, which has always been pretty civil and pretty friendly. And a lot of this is kind of rooted in a shared, stated mutual interest that we want to elect Democrats and defeat Republicans.
Yeah.
And so we've had a pretty friendly civil rapport ever since then. And I did watch this conversation. I was actually, the second I found out about it, I was excited because I wanted to see basically how Constantine and the Triggernometry, the pair of them, I don't even know the other guy's name. I'm blanking on it. But do you know what it is, Brianna?
I'm tired. I'm sorry. I'm
No, it's okay.
well, yes.
It's okay. If he's watching right now, he will be wildly
I'm
offended.
so sorry.
But I believe that they're enlightened centrists, right? So I believe that they're really.
I don't know it. They seem like they lean more right, in my
Agreed.
view.
Well, that's what I call the enlightened centrist, basically
Sure.
somebody who is conservative but doesn't want to say that they are.
Yeah.
And so to have somebody who was a Democratic operative on their podcast who wasn't Tulsi Gabbard, I thought that would be an interesting conversation to have. And so I did watch it, and I was a bit disappointed with some of the decisions that were made by Brianna strategically. So yeah, that's basically, I walked away from it thinking that she was very generous to the Triggernometry folks, and they did not reciprocate her generosity. So she gave them everything. In perhaps what was good faith. It was an attempt to establish a dialogue with a more conservative podcast, more conservative audience, and they didn't reciprocate. They gave her nothing, and that's something that I think that is worth discussing as far as.
So I think this might be a good place to dig in, because I think the mission objective that you're outlining here, that I need to go on there and be Team Democrat. Yeah, look, obviously I want Democrats to win. I don't like Republicans. I'm not going to vote for Republicans. But my mission objective was a little bit different. In researching for this, Josiah, I was looking at your channel, and I don't think there's a lot of trans content there. It's not that you're silent on it, and I assume you're an ally. I've never talked to you about that. But it's not really a major focus for you. So I want to be really straight and say that the main thing I wanted to talk to that audience was shoring up the arguments for several things, which is in some cases children having access to HRT if the indications are extremely clear, making the case that adults needed access to HRT, and kind of making a more moderate pitch on trans rights, which I thought his audience would really appreciate. That was my main mission objective. The second mission objective was understanding that the Triggernometry audience is generally more right wing. I wanted to go there and be just a normie Democrat, right? And particularly after October 7th, where so much of our party has steered into what I consider to be outright anti-Semitism, I wanted to go there and give just a face saying, hey, there are Democrats that are really upset about this too. And some of this more communist direction that we've moved into, that doesn't represent me and that doesn't represent my party. So does that make sense to you? It's not, my mission wasn't to go there and be like vote Democrat. It was a little more nuanced than that. Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but I would argue that even with that mission, I question some of the rhetorical tactics that you use, because you could have, I think, adopted a more moderate approach on trans rights, and also went out of your way, as you did, to distance yourself from what you described in the conversation as the progressive fringe with
Yeah.
respect to Israel-Palestine. I think that that's fair for you to do. But it was other aspects of the conversation where I felt that you did not stand your ground in a way that you should, and gave too much. Like with respect to, we can get into it, in more detail. I know Whick was going to say something, but like
Let's do it.
defending Biden's record, Afghanistan, and also the extent to which the progressive fringe represents the Democratic Party. Because you may recall, the one time that we ever had any sort of public disagreement prior to this, because I usually keep my eyes focused on MAGA Republicans and, unrepentant right-wingers or enlightened centrists, so I tend not to punch left.
Sure.
But the one time that you and I had a public disagreement, it was about this. Like, to what extent we can say that the entire progressive movement is characterized by its fringe, to what extent that progressive fringe embodies the Democratic Party or President Biden. And these were the things that I took particular issue with. I think you were too charitable to a party that, or to a group, two people that had no interest in reciprocating your charity.
Yeah, and I'm just going to interject here, because this is kind of like, I think, a very important thing to discuss. How much charity should we give the other side in these things, in these discussions? Where should we fight? Where should we stand our ground and say, no, what you just said is wrong, and possibly derail into the conversation? And where should we be like, you know what, we disagree on this, but let's tackle it another day. I'm here to talk about X, Y, or Z. And I think that this is a very interesting kind of strategic discussion. So just to get my thoughts out here about the discussion is, I thought that if your objective was to go out, and this is to you, Brianna, if your objective was to go in there and to build bridges, I think that you succeeded. However, I do agree with Josiah in that there were a few places where I would have liked for you to push back more. The Ukrainian one and the Afghanistan one are the two that come to mind immediately, but I'm sure there are more. But I just wanted to ask you, Brianna, when it comes to your objective, like as you said, you wanted to go in there and be a normie Democrat and also represent trans issues you felt were important. How do you feel you succeeded at that? Like, how do you feel about it coming out of that? I just want to talk about that for a minute, and then we can get back into the back and forth.
Well, I think it was a good interview in the sense that I think it clearly got a lot of buzz, right? So I think it was successful from that point of view. And, I got probably 300 or 400 emails, PMs, private messages from people saying that I really helped change their mind on some things. So that's, non-trivial to me. Right after it, I want to tell you, my own husband, who was there with me, told me he thought that I should have defended Biden a little bit more strongly. So I take that criticism. I think that's fair. In my defense, typically when you go on these shows, you get a real breakdown of what you're going to be talking about from the producers. So what I'd planned to talk about with the producers was a lot more talking about, trans issues, talking about the October 7th, the direction that things had gone with progressives after October 7th, which is, what I've talked to Constantine about quite a bit. So I'm not saying that you're wrong, that I shouldn't have defended Biden more. But if I'd known that that was going to be a subject, I would have prepared for that. And, before I do this major media hit, I always go through and I say, what are the points I want to hit? I write them out, I research them, I word them, I practice them. And I think that's probably why the trans stuff was so much better than the Biden stuff, because frankly, I just had not really extensively prepared for that, if that makes sense.
No, it makes an entire sense. I understand. It's just I think further evidence that there's certain venues that when I go in, right, I know or I'm pretty sure that certain topics are going to come up in a wide stretch. Now I get
Sure.
it that if you don't want if I'm confronted with someone who has who has a topic that I am not very well researched on or that I am not comfortable discussing, I could be like, well, I've heard differently, um, but I'm not prepared to talk about that. I don't know at this present time. I think that's
But I did
great.
defend Biden
You
off the
did.
cuff.
No,
I
you
mean,
did.
yeah,
You did.
yeah.
But I think that you gave too, as Josiah said, I think you
So,
gave too much. But I don't want to.
so
For
get
this part,
specific. Get specific. I want to hear
sure.
specifically.
Well, I'll let Josiah articulate it. He prepared the timestamps and all that, so he probably has those transcripts ready, and he can do it. But we're gonna do that. But I wanna hit also on the point after this of this bridge building. I'm curious to hear what some of the messages about what you change people's minds on. I'm just curious to hear that. But let's
Sure.
go to Josiah with the transcripts. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
yeah. So, couple of things. When it comes to defending Biden and the Democrats, right? And again, just assuming that was at least on the back of your mind as a Democratic operative, somebody who wants to get Democrats elected. A couple of things that stood out to me, and it's about at the 38-minute 40-second mark on the transcript, or excuse me, on the video, which is, Constantine turns to the topic of the border. Okay, now you did a really good thing here, which is that you mentioned that Democrats attempted to pass, or rather, there was attempted the passage of a bipartisan border bill. You said that it would actually make Democrats very unhappy, which I understand the rhetorical tool there. You're saying, like, listen, this is actually something that was done that would have made my side unhappy, and we attempted to do it.
That's right.
And Republicans killed it. Constantine didn't respond at all. And I think that would have been a missed opportunity. That was a missed opportunity. You could have said, Constantine, I want to pause on here for a minute. So you and your co-host bring up the border. You're really upset with the situation at the southern border. It seems that you're pretty critical of Democrats. You're pretty critical of President Biden, but government is more than the three branches. There's a legislature.
I would be critical of the situation over multiple administrations. I mean, right, this didn't happen
100%.
under Biden. Yeah.
Right. We haven't had comprehensive border reform in 30 years.
Yeah.
That would have been a great moment for you to push a guy who says he's nonpartisan, who say he's not Republican or Democrat, to actually give a concession to you and say, do you agree, Constantine, that it was wrong, that it was a controversy, a crisis for Republicans to say that there is a crisis at the southern border, use it as a cudgel against the president and the Democrats, work in good faith for months to come up with a bipartisan border bill, and then the second that Trump says he wants to use it as a wedge issue, they cynically pull it away. Does that not make the Republicans morally culpable for the ongoing crisis that you're worried about? And see what would happen. Because I don't know if he was just unaware of that particular legislative history, but he didn't respond at all. And then you kept going, and then you kind of threw him a bone back and said Democrats have their heads in the sand about this. But I would argue, with respect, at this point, Republicans own the issue at the southern border. If you and I agree that there's a crisis, and we work to solve the crisis, but then I pull away to gain a cynical electoral edge, it's my fault now because I have sabotaged this thing in good faith. And I think that you should have made Constantine pay a price, so to speak, for. I think this would have been a good opportunity.
Just to you, Josiah, before Brianna responds,
Sure.
How hard do you press on that? Out of curiosity, like if it's clear that they don't want to engage, how much do you insist that they take this point, right? I'm just curious.
So there, I think it's a judgment call. So if Brianna had circled back and said, Constantine, again, in the interest of good faith, are you aware of this? Can we talk about this? If you are aware of it, will you concede? Don't you agree that it's a problem that Republicans sabotage this cynically to gain an electoral edge? And then see how he responds. If he ultimately responds that I don't know anything about that, Brianna, then you could have said, oh, it's a perfect opportunity to educate you. Here's what happened. Or if you weren't, brushed up on the facts because you weren't prepared to discuss it, you could have said, like, this is something worth examining because it is dishonest. And I don't think you're trying to be dishonest, Constantine, but it is dishonest to suggest that President Biden alone carries blame for the situation at the southern border. The other party does too. So that to me is where I think some of this is a judgment call. And also even the entire enterprise. Like, I know she caught a lot of flack for having this conversation on Triggernometry. I don't share that criticism.
Can we talk about that for a minute?
I want to respond to his.
Please.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Finish, then Brianna respond. Then I want to talk about the.
Yeah, I was going to say, if Brianna would like to respond to that.
Yeah.
So I hear what you're saying. So first I want to make a meta point. And, I know everyone in Twitch Paul hates it when you bring up gender, but it is just simply true that women pay a different price in these spaces for being aggressive, particularly if you're being aggressive against the host. It is a tool that I have to use way more selectively than someone like Destiny has to, right? He can go argue flat out with Constantine, and I actually watched clips of him doing this ahead of time. It doesn't really... the reason I push him on it is because he won't really answer if you drill down on him. I watched 4 or 5 Destiny clips of him doing that, so I was not under the impression it was going to go well. Secondly, I think y'all just don't have the experience where if you get really aggressive with a host, where you are a bitch, you are difficult, you are a bad guest, you're anything but what is helpful in that moment. I'm going to go do David Pakman's show in about a few weeks to talk about, kind of bridging this fringe and the party. The one time I've ever lost my temper in an interview was with David Pakman 10 years ago. And it really did not go well for me. It was a really, really strong lesson to keep your cool no matter what. So I think, respectfully, I hear you. I think you don't understand the calculus that women in this space have to use when they're choosing whether to go aggro on a host or not. So secondly, I think what I would say is I don't share your assessment that just because the Democrats decided to work on this one bill in the 11th hour, that there's not like a lot of failed opportunities over the last 20 years. You know as well as I do, there's a contingency in our party that wants open borders. They think ICE is automatically the enemy. When people come through the border and they claim asylum, kids have to go somewhere. And they say that's kids in cages. They don't want any infrastructure set up to do that. And they make Democrats pay a price for just providing housing for that situation. So I think you can look up and down the policy here. And my honest view is it's not all the Democrats' fault or the Republicans' fault. This is plenty of failure to go both ways. One example, here in Massachusetts, we have an international port. We've actually had to send a lot of our judges down to the southern border because they're so understaffed down there, because there's been a failure by presidents of both parties and the Congress, when it's been in control of both parties, to apportion more money to fund immigration courts just to make sure the law is applied fairly. So, I hear what you're saying, but it's not my honest view that everything the Democrats have done on the border is good and everything the Republicans have done is evil. I think it's failure on both sides.
It's not. Well, that's not my view either, and I'm not even asking it for it to be your view. I'm just saying that if you agree that both sides did something wrong, then instead of, in my opinion, focusing exclusively on what the Democrats have failed to do, their heads in the sand, I think you should have spent more time, being the armchair quarterback here, talking to Constantine about the failures of the Republican Party.
That's fair.
Because because I disagree. I don't know any Democrat unless I missed something from AOC or Ilhan Omar or Rashida Tlaib where they want open borders. And this
Not an
particular
elected Democrat, no.
fair enough.
Yeah.
But I think that's also something as a broader distinction worth making. You know, you talk about the progressive fringe a lot in this conversation, and it's clearly something that they want to emphasize on. This is really a series of agreements and reaffirmations between you and the Triggernometry co-host. But I think another distinction worth making is saying, hey, Constantine, just FYI, the critical difference between the people that we both agree, you and them, are crazy on the left versus those who are crazy on the right is that the right are much more likely to elect their crazies and give them state power than those on the left. You know, that I think that's also something worth mentioning, that the people who sabotaged this border bill weren't people on Twitter, even though certainly progressives complained about it. It was the Republicans. And so that's just, to me, it's like, I'm not asking you to say Democrats are perfect, Republicans are pure evil.
Sure.
But I think it's worth spending your time on, especially if the whole point is building a bridge. Well, are you crossing the bridge to them, or is this a bridge where you meet in the middle? Because if it is, then either Constantine on his own initiative has to meet you in the middle, or if he won't, you should try to coax him over. Like, hey, Constantine, I've given you a little. I've talked shit about the left here in good faith. This is something I share. Why don't you give me something of the right? Like, what has the right done? What's Trump done? What's the Republicans done? There was none of that. None.
I think that's fair. You know, one of the talking points I did prepare a lot to talk about was an election denialism, which, you know, in my view, is the hard stop of why you just can't vote for a Republican, right? You know, I think no matter how you feel about any given policy, you know, the Constitution and the peaceful transfer of power, that trumps, even for me, abortion, trans rights. There's nothing more important than that.
Agreed.
And the Republicans don't seem to believe in that. So that was something I'd really planned for, and you know, the conversation didn't go there. So please go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, may I point this out, because it's funny you say that. This was kind of another point that was a source of frustration for me, just with the dialogue there, because I agree they didn't really invite any conversation for you to talk about the electoral denialism within the GOP. But at the 47-14 mark, I also had this noted, that the other guy, the co-pilot, whose name escapes us both, he says...
I need to Google this. Anyway, carry on.
Yeah, or maybe it was Constantine. I just have host written down. I thought it was the other guy, but he says if Donald Trump is reelected...
It's Francis.
It's Francis, thank you. It's Francis. So
we got it. Don't worry, Francis.
Okay.
We got
Frank.
you. You're not forgotten. Go ahead.
Yeah. But the host at 47-14, and I should have put down if it was Constantine or if it was Francis, he says, if Donald Trump is reelected, you will see a progressive meltdown on a scale that will dwarf 2016, which will only make the country worse and the left way more unelectable. And you responded with, that's right, they don't believe in democracy, they being the fringe left. To me, that would have been a perfect opportunity for you to use that platform to also emphasize that paramount concern. Say, but also, Francis and or Constantine, if we're going to talk about meltdowns, there's a chance that Donald Trump might not win. And do you recall what happened, Constantine and or Francis, the last time Donald Trump lost an election? They tried to stage an insurrection. The left never did that. That is one area where just objectively the right transgressed much worse. So what do you have to say about that, Constantine and or Francis? Like, can we, if we're gonna...
Do you think it's fucking easy for you to sit here and just like go through clips and go like, why didn't you say this? I mean, do you not think I could dial up your own show and look at a transcript
100%.
and do this to you all day? Do you know how, like, you understand this is kind of, it's kind of condescending, right? Like you get that, right?
So I said that it's armchair quarterbacking earlier, and if this is, I mean, this is the kind of the conversation, right, where I disagree about your approach. But Brianna, if that's a problem, then we shouldn't even continue the conversation, because that's...
I'm just saying it's really easy to sit here and go, you should have said X, you should have said Y. I mean, I don't disagree with you that I probably should have shown up and prepared to defend Biden more. The clips of trigonometry that I prepared to watch for, and I could show you the clips I traded back and forth with the producers as I asked for every single interview he'd ever given on trans stuff, and I watched all of those 3 or 4 times, preparing for that and getting my talking points ready on that. I completely cede that I should have been prepared to go more aggressive on defending Democrats. We're in agreement on that. I'm just saying it is so easy to sit here and like, I'm sure if I went back and looked at it, I would find tons of stuff that I could say differently or better, right? It's just...
Yeah, it's true. No, I'm going to give you this one, right? And I don't think Josiah would disagree that, yes,
Not at all.
for me, I look back on some of the stuff I sometimes I go on shows or I do my own shows and I look back and it's like, man, I missed that, I missed the other. It's very hard in the moment to get things exactly right. So what I don't want this to be, and I'm trying not to make this, is to have this be like a thing where we just tear you down the whole time, because that's not. Because as I told you in private, and I'll just say public, like 80% of that, what you did in there, good. I stand it. We should do more of it. And
it's incredibly difficult to go into these spaces.
Absolutely.
I mean,
and if I may finish, though, just real quick, right?
Sure.
Like the fact that you were willing to go into a potentially hostile situation, a hostile podcast, and confront people directly and admit to the faults in your own side, right? And then have that discussion puts you head and shoulders above all these people who are calling you out for even going on. And if I want just briefly to transition to that for a moment to talk about that a little bit, because one of the reasons I invited you on tonight is because I saw people like Sock Done Left and all these other people come at you for, oh, is this Wu leaving the left? How dare she be nice to Republicans or centrists? Or how dare she, oh, look, Elon Musk tweeted at her, oh, this must be her being an apologist. And I just wanted to kind of not only give you a chance to respond to that. Oh, you okay, Josiah? Oh.
Sorry, my girlfriend popped in. I was just saying later.
Oh, no, it's okay,
Yeah.
it's okay. But also to just kind of reinforce how this, when people say that we look crazy and the left looks crazy, this is what they mean. And doing this kind of clubhouse mentality, if you don't agree with us 100%, you're kicked out of the clubhouse or you're leaving the clubhouse, it's hurting our cause and it's really bad. But I want to give you a chance to respond and tell us about that side of things. And then I promise we got some more stuff to go over, right? But I wanted to just give you that opportunity.
So, Josiah, this is where I think the work I do, and I say this respectfully because I know that we are friends, but I think that what I do is harder than what you do to an extent. Like, it's not difficult to go be 100% Team Democrat and to make the conscious decision to never criticize your own side or rarely criticize your own side unless it's Brianna Wu, or to stay away largely with your show around really difficult subjects like what the trans rights movement should be doing. That is something I feel a tremendous ethical responsibility to do. I genuinely, to the core of my soul, believe that if trans rights stays on the course we're going right now, we will lose everything. Access to HRT, gender affirming care, insurance paying for it is within my lifetime that most trans people could not get GRS because Obamacare didn't cover it, right? It is amazing. And all of this stuff is very much at risk. So the thing I am trying to do, which is to point out that some of the extremists on our own side, I understand that it's distasteful to you. But what I have seen, and I'm 46, is I've seen that by leaving these fringes unaddressed, our party just keeps getting weaker and weaker, and we are handing the Republicans the machine gun they need to kill all of us. And let me give you a very, very specific example. I think that if Biden loses this election, it is going to be partially because we have not tended to the Jewish vote in this country. We need that coalition to win as Democrats. they donate money, they donate time. I've never worked on a social justice cause in Massachusetts or elsewhere that's not had a lot of Jewish people there. And I think a lot of our politicians have been afraid to really talk about the anti-Semitic fringe and what they are doing here. And that is a role I feel respectfully you have advocated and abdicated. And I think it leaves our party weaker. So I hear what you're saying about tactics A, B, and C and how I might have done them better, but I'm trying to do a different job here. I'm trying to steer the Democratic Party back in a direction as someone that does have credibility on these issues to something that I think will be more successful electorally. And I think that's a really important political project.
I want to ask you, Josiah, right? Since you're here
Sure.
too, right? We can't. I have some issues with both of you here, right? Like I have some issues with Wu. We're gonna go through them.
I
We have some
am
issues
I
with
am
you.
well aware of our issues. You and I
Exactly.
hashed them out.
We've
Yeah.
had this conversation before, but I think it's worth bringing back up,
Yeah.
right? One of the things that Wu says here, I just think is correct, right? That in a lot of ways you, and again, we're buddies, bro. Okay, this isn't an attack.
I won't take it personally.
Yeah, you fail to keep our house in order. One of the problems we have is I understand you want to keep the focus on MAGA Republicans because they're worse. I agree. I'm not a Republican. I'm a Democrat, right? For a good reason.
Yeah.
But I think it makes it harder for the normie, the undecided, the maybe center right leaning or maybe center left leaning person to take us seriously when we are refused to say the sun is shining when it's shining, right? Like we refuse to acknowledge just these basic facts of, yeah, there's a big anti-Semitism problem on the fringes of the left and the right, right? And so I think my question for you, sir,
Sure.
is in what ways or why don't you do that more? I guess I'll start by asking. Yeah, why have you just kind of decided to focus on MAGA?
Yeah, so a couple of things. So number one, I just want to say again for the record, I completely disagree with anyone who says that conversations with Triggernometry are not worth having. I think that's a judgment call. There are probably some people, I imagine, that it would not be worth engaging with, but I don't think Triggernometry is one of them. David Pakman's been on Triggernometry, Steven Destiny's been on Triggernometry, Bill Maher, and a bunch of others as well. I think that they are perfectly within the Overton window of acceptable dialogue. I just think it's what you do with that opportunity which matters, and that's where the disagreement between Brianna and I is. Now, as far as her goals being different, again, I totally understand that she is trying to appeal to more moderate people, more centrist people, perhaps Republicans who could be won over. And so she goes on to these platforms and tries to establish a rapport with the hosts. She says that she's received dozens, hundreds of emails saying that, hey, you've kind of moved me on this issue. So I mean, I can't fight that. I have no idea, what those emails say. She says that they have been won over. I've got to take that at face value. I can just only opine on what it looks like externally, which is, again, I think she was too generous with the opposing side and extracted no meaningful concessions from Triggernometry. But I take her point. Somebody's going to have these conversations. I have not been invited on Triggernometry, and I don't know how it would be.
If you
Of course.
Would you?
Of course,
accept it?
absolutely, 100%. Yeah, there's no reason not to. I'd love to be on. That's why I'm on Pierce Morgan's ass all the time too. I'm hoping
saw
eventually,
that.
once I crack 500,000 subscribers or something like that, I can be on Pierce
You gotta
Morgan.
get that clout, bro. It's okay.
That's right, baby. That's right. So I'm hoping that'll eventually happen. But again, I don't fault any for this, and I also take the point. Again, to say it is easy to do an after game review, like they do in sports, and say, you should have tossed the ball here, whatever.
You too, if you like, trust me.
Well, hold on.
Right.
But respectfully, that's not my statement. My statement was my political project is more difficult than yours. I don't think it's hard to go and produce a show that's like just attacking the Republicans,
Sure.
right? I think it is much more difficult to be in groups and to see the fringe politics driving it off a cliff and to speak up against that. Josiah, it comes at such a high cost for my mental sanity and my peace. And, there's a dollar sign attached to that, right? What I consider to be a very principled stand on October 7th, this is a fight that you've largely sat out. And I'm sure it's been great for your channel growth. And I don't fault you. You don't have to do what I do. But I do think it's a braver choice. And I think it's not that I don't think you have a right to sit here and go, you should have done A, B, and C. But from my point of view, like, I don't see a lot of what you do as a profile in courage.
Can I I'll let you respond. Don't worry. But Wu, can I ask you a question on that?
Sure.
Do you fault him for that? Do you think that like he has to? I would disagree with you on that. I think that
I did
like
say that. I
okay.
literally just said the opposite.
I'm just
said,
making sure.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm clarifying. Okay, because if I may stick up for Josiah for a moment, right? You're right. He does something different than I do, something different than you do. But I think that thing has value, and I think there is a form of courage and honesty in saying, "Hey, I don't know enough about this topic. It's very super complex. I don't know, so I'm not going to weigh in." And I honestly applaud you for doing that. I should do that more. I should say, you know what? I don't actually know much about this, so I should probably shut up. That's a flaw I have. I like to talk, but Josiah, I just want to stick up for you a little bit here because Josiah, I think you're great. You're awesome.
I appreciate
but
that.
Please,
Yeah.
Wu, if you're not finished, you can finish, and then Josiah can respond. Cool?
I appreciate you chiming in, Whick, but I'm trying to ask Josiah questions, and I just kind of want to answer for that.
Sure.
Like, I mean, do you hear where I'm coming from with that?
Oh my God. These are the technical issues I'm talking about. So yes, I do. Can you all still hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Is the camera still showing?
No, the camera is not showing.
Hang on. Okay, so you all be able to hear me, but I'm gonna shut the camera off and try to turn it back on. So anyway, so I do hear from where you're coming from, Brianna, that it is certainly a much more volatile space to in terms of being attacked by the left than what I do. There's no question about that.
Yeah.
But it is also a choice that I made for a couple of reasons. Number one, I don't know nearly as much about this issue. Foreign policy was not, I have a political science degree, but foreign policy was not my area of focus. It was more domestic policy and electoral politics. So number one, I try to stay out of areas that I don't know enough about. Number two, because I am covering electoral politics and domestic policy in an election year, I just don't have the bandwidth to even cover it, even if I wanted to. And number three, I take your point. Again, just want to reiterate that, of course, it is a much more contentious area for you to do what you're doing. But I would also argue respectfully that the courage has to manifest itself if you're going to talk about these issues with the quote unquote opposition that you're trying to make bridges with. You also need to confront them about your disagreements, and I don't think you did. So I think it's two different aspects of courage. I'll perfectly concede to the one, but I don't think it was particularly brave for you to spend most of your time agreeing with Constantine and Francis. And I know you're capable of enormous courage. I just don't think like this particular one was a standout example of it. But I don't fault you for that because, again, I get the pressure that you're under, but I just think you could have stood up a bit more for some of these issues.
So this is the math as I see it, and maybe this is just a difference in what we think the Democrats should be doing. As best as I can tell, progressives or the fringe left represents between 1% to 2% of the electorate. I've looked at the numbers as honestly as I can. As far as the people that actually show up and vote, that's what it looks like to me. The fastest growing segment of the American electorate are independents. They're 42% of the party, right? And a lot of these do lean right. But a lot of people are looking at the crazies on both sides and they're going, I can't vote for either of them. And part of it is because like accounts like Libs of TikTok are amplifying the fringe, and Fox News amplifies our fringe and equates them with MAGA. I think all three of us would probably agree that like there's a lot more MAGA than there are like fringe crazy communist progressive.
Right.
But it still needs an answer. Right. So let me give you a hypothetical. Like
Sure.
Lauren Southern is going to be coming over here to do a shoot it's going to be September, early September. Right. We hated each other during Gamergate, screamed at each other all the time. She had a child. she has really she's talked about this. She has a much bigger awareness of the challenges that women face in the workplace and kind of
Sure.
what the role of feminism is. I personally have had, a lot of disillusionment with a lot of the progressive policies that I was advocating during Gamergate, right? So, like, for a conversation like that, do you think, like, is it more helpful for me with Lauren Southern to sit down and go like, "Oh, I just hate you. You're completely wrong about this," or to
No, of
sit
course
down
not.
and go like, "Hey, this is what I've learned in the last decade. This is what you've learned in the last
Sure.
decade. We disagree on this. Let's talk about immigration." Like she's going to be staying at the hotel where my state of Massachusetts is putting a lot of the migrants that have come here
Right.
up. So, to talk about how that's affected the Massachusetts budget, right? Or what the public policy should be about that. I think that like building bridges for the like calculated purpose of appealing to that 42%, that seems like a really smart mission to me, but maybe you disagree.
No, I listen. So, not the world's foremost expert on Lauren Southern, but from my limited understanding, and you kind of hinted at it, she seems to be moderating in
Yeah,
certain aspects compared to where she was, 2, 3, or 4 years ago, or however long ago it was. I think unless there's something about her that I'm missing, I think that's a totally worthwhile endeavor. But Brianna, that's precisely the point. I think she'll reciprocate. I think you can say, "Hey, listen, Lauren, here are things that I dislike about the left." And then you guys beat up on the left. And then I think, maybe I'm wrong, Lauren would say, "You know what sucks about the right?"
oh
And then
yeah.
you guys, but Constantine didn't do that. That to me is the difference. So I think that this is a great example of where I think it may be much more fruitful than the conversation that you had with Triggernometry, because I think unlike Constantine and Francis, based on my understanding, Lauren Southern is willing to actually she's willing to reciprocate your charity and talk about the crazies on her side and how it's been deleterious to the overall movement. That was not the case in Trigonometry. They did not care to reciprocate your charity at all. It was just completely, let's talk about the 30 million ways why the left sucks. And so
That's
that's why I
fair.
think Lauren Southern will be more productive, or at least has
That's
the
fair.
potential to be.
That's fair. I do think you misunderstand. Have you read Constantine's book by chance? Because I
I have
feel like
not.
people really misunderstand him. So, yeah, he is basically someone that escaped communism, came to the West. He's Jewish and really, really, really fell in love with Western values, which I know
Sure.
you say Western values, you think of that as like a right wing catchphrase, but he really means it in the sense of like liberalism, enlightened multiculturalism, free speech, free markets, all that kind of stuff. That's fundamentally where he's coming from. And I think a lot of what people perceive as right wing is really, I think the outcome is the policies he talks about are more right wing, but I don't think it's because he's a right wing ideologue. I think it's because the right wing talks about the value of all of those things more than we do, which is why I appreciate what you do, Wick, which is talk a lot about free speech and the
I try
value
to.
of it. Yeah.
If I may, because I remembered the exact point I wanted to make.
Sure.
Once you brought up Constantine and his values and things like that. During the show, he mentions Ukraine, and you guys talk about Ukraine. One of the
Yeah.
statements he makes is that Ukraine, we need to start moving towards pushing for peace in that region, right? For pushing for Ukraine to sit down with
Yeah.
Russia. If I was there, okay, that's where I would have been like, nope, hold on, we have some discussions to have here. I
So
think
I
that the
don't
way,
remember
if
what I
I,
said in that
no, I
moment. Can
understand.
you remind me? Yeah.
I don't think you addressed the point, which is the issue,
Okay.
right? Like, so what happened, like, when people say these things, right, and when people just say something, so what I felt was just miss the mark. And again, I don't mind Constantine. I think he's right on a lot of things, but he's wrong on more. And this is one of those things he's wrong on. And I think that we should have just, uh, you should have just when you were there. And again, Monday morning quarterbacking, I get it, but it's one of those things that just it made me like, I wish I was there. I wish I had been in the seat to push back against these things. But I wanted to ask, and this is to both of you actually. Um, we talk about the fringe, and one of the things that Josiah, you've said before about the fringe of the left is that they are not in any position of political power, and that's largely true. But where you and I disagree on this, where you and I disagree on this is, I think that they have political influence that is outsized
Yes.
by their legislative
Yes.
representation, and I just wonder how much you worry about a lot of the fringe left being anti-Biden, not just neutral on Biden, but outright, we're not going to vote for Genocide Joe. So
Yeah,
how
so
do you
listen,
how do you
yeah.
deal with that? And then I want to hear Brianna's opinion too. But I want to toss it to you first and get your thoughts. Go ahead.
Yeah, so of course there are things I see on Twitter. There are conversations that I have privately. I've had them publicly with the guys from the Vanguard, are a great example, who are leftists, who are anti-Biden, and I think they're veering more towards anti-electoralism. I frequently engage with them. As a matter of fact, I'm supposed to be having a conversation with them on Sunday. We'll see how that goes based on the current workload. Another one. God damn it! The camera dip out again.
Yes. Sorry.
Okay, just
Sorry.
no, don't apologize. It's shit on my end. This is what I'm talking about. This is what I meant before the conversation that we had in private.
Sure.
So yeah, there are people on the left and shit that I see on Twitter that drives me nuts. And even from people that I consider like good friends that I have disagreements with. But here's how I look at it. And again, you may disagree, but I think it is sound logic. I'm a finite person with a finite set of skills and a finite area of knowledge. And right now I don't have the bandwidth to try to master everything. And so I basically pick my battles, as I feel that we all do. I don't think anybody's indiscriminate. And so when I evaluate my quote unquote targets, I see that the Republican Party is objectively worse. And unless something has happened with Brianna, which I don't think it has, she would agree. The Republican Party is just worse than the Democratic Party. They elect their crazies. They give them state power. Marjorie Taylor Greene is not some lunatic on Twitter. Well, she is, but she's got an official office Twitter, right? We don't see that nearly as often on the left. And I will never pretend that these two sides are comparable.
Well, no one's asking you to, but what I am asking.
I understand. So, but let me finish. So the reason that I hyperfixate on the right is because I believe that they are the biggest and most proximate threat. But to tell you, as I believe I've told you before, but to reaffirm, of course I take issue with what's going on aspects of the left, particularly on social media, and certainly the anti-electoralism. It's incredibly dangerous.
Do you think it's going to have an effect, is my question. Like, how worried about it are you, was like the specific question. How much do you think this is going to impact the upcoming election?
I don't. So it's going to be a razor thin election, and I think it's possible that it will have an effect. But I also I don't know. That's the problem. And that's also, again, one of the reasons why I engage with, again, the likes of the Vanguard, because they are anti-Biden and anti-electoral at this point. I think that they're either going to vote third party or not at all. And yeah, I do think that is a problem worth responding to, but I also think it's important to keep it in perspective. I would never make 50% of my time, let alone the totality of my time or the majority of my time, focusing on policing the left, unless I was on the right. Like, I feel that at the end of the day, you got to triage, and the biggest obstacle is the right.
I want to toss the same question to Brianna Wu and let her go. And gang, just a housekeeping thing. I will be reading the super chats which you're giving. I'll be reading those in about 10 minutes at the top of the hour. So keep sending me money.
Did the camera come back on?
Yes, you're good. Wu, take it away.
So I'm extremely worried about this, and Josiah, this is where I think you're wrong, because I think you're assuming the only way to have power is to have electoral power, and that is not true. I think the fringe left has captured a lot of media power, and I think they have a lot of power in silencing people that they disagree with. A really good example, Anna Kasparian and her entire controversy with birthing person, right? This is something, I'm sorry, if you talk to cis women, the majority of them entirely agree with Anna. It is obviously wildly dehumanizing to be called, like, defined by your reproductive organs, right? But the way the fringe left took this issue is to make her pay a price for this. If you look at the way the fringe left wields cultural power, you have medical institutions, Planned Parenthood, just across the board that's really steering away from language to even say man or woman when it's coming to healthcare stuff. And this has a really, it is power being exercised. And my objection to it isn't like some weird gender critical turfy like objection to it. My problem with it is it makes people hate trans people and not want to support trans rights. I've got a really big problem with that. So the way that they are wielding that power, it doesn't just affect Biden. On the issues that I care about the very most, the fringe left is making it so we are unelectable. So I have a massive, massive problem with that. And I think you're really discounting how big the threat is.
Can we unpack that for a minute? Because again, correct
Please.
me if I'm wrong.
Sure.
Seriously, correct me if I'm wrong. But wasn't Anna Kasparian upset because of language that was used in legislation to refer to birthing person? Not saying that you're suggesting this, but as far as I'm aware, it wasn't like MSNBC and CNN stopped referring to women when it came to having kids and they referred only to birthing people.
No, I think it was some organization was saying birthing person, some healthcare organization was saying that as far as providing gynecological care. That's as I'm remembering it. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think it was legislation.
We may be on the same page because I thought it was about legislation referencing gynecological, prenatal and neonatal care. That was my understanding. And she was triggered from my understanding that the language in the bill and that the language that people were advocating being used in the bill referred to birthing person, which I think is actually pretty anodyne, given that, that it's not just, biological or assigned to birth women can have kids, right? I as far as I'm aware, it was not
Are
like
you
this.
really going to pretend that there's not a trans project to erase any, like, to rewrite all of this language? Because there obviously is, man. I mean, come on. Let's get real.
Yeah, but let's get real. I don't know how widespread that is, Brianna, because again, I pay attention to electoral politics. I pay attention to the news. It's entirely possible that I'm missing something in between commercials. But one thing I do know, this is not the position of the Democratic Party. It's not the position of Joe Biden. And it's not the position of CNN, MSNBC, or the major news networks. It's not the position, as far as I'm aware, of David Pakman, the Young Turks, major political commentators. So I don't know where it is. I'm sure it's out there.
There is a poll that just came out a couple of days ago, and I will link it to you after we get done, showing support for trans rights is plummeting quickly. And it is because of all of this stuff. And to be clear, a big part of this is accounts like Libs of TikTok picking the worst representatives for trans rights and advertising it. But the other part of it is there is this soft cultural power that is being wielded to do things that just don't make sense to normal people and to get things like Planet Fitness. I don't know if you know this story, but there was someone, California passed a law that made it so if you want to change your gender, you don't have to do what you had to do 20 years ago, which is go to therapy, get a therapist to write a letter certifying that you have gender identity disorder, and take that letter and use it to go get hormones and your documentation changed. You can just go to the DMV and fill out a checkbox. Makes sense, like, hey, demedicalizing stuff, making it easier, sure. But what happened is someone who was a little pervert and was not trans, and someone who got off by showing their genitals to women abused that law to basically do this and go into a locker room and expose their genitals to women. And it was hard at the time. So, the thing is, those stories make it out into the mainstream.
Can you link me that story after?
Hold on. Let me finish. And it does make it very difficult to talk about this in a nuanced way because of that soft cultural power that is being employed. it's very hard to have a nuanced conversation about public policy, about what the public policy of California should be for changing your gender on driver's licenses, because it instantly gets dialed up to 11 and you're called a transphobe if you have anything but the most extreme position. This is really hurting the movement.
I want you to respond to that. Before you do, I would like a link to that story so I can review
Sure.
it at some time. But yeah, that's just to piggyback back off that. The problem isn't so much that there's legislation, right? These things. It's that we can't talk about these things without a substantial portion of the fringe just excising you. I think, pardon me for using you as an example, Brianna, but I think Brianna is an excellent example of this happening, and I can see it in my chat, my YouTube chat, and things like that. Any kind of bringing up of anything that does not fit the narrative that they have decided is what leftism is treated as transphobia, right-wing fear-mongering, all these things. And it has turned off a substantial amount. Biden should be running away with this election. Biden should be running away with this election based on the facts at hand, based on how the economy is doing, right? Based on the fact that Trump is a convicted felon, based on the insurrection attempt in January 6th, based on all these facts, but he's not. And part of that is because we have let ourselves the dialogue, right, around these things, the discourse around these things, be captured by these crazies who have decided that if you disagree with them, and they don't have any real legislative power, but for whatever reason, our elected officials have decided to grant them this power to affect how they talk about these things. Yeah, you get castigated, you get crucified. And I think we have example after example after example of this happening. So I this is where I'll push back against you, Josiah. I just don't know how you can't see that, and it feels like you can't see that. I don't know. Maybe I'm being unfair to you, but respond, please.
No, I think it comes down again to triage. I will acknowledge that there is a fringe movement, particularly on social media, who say crazy shit, and I recognize that. I don't know to what extent it animates or to what extent it's representative of the progressive movement. Twitter is not the most trafficked social media website, for example. It could be 5%, it could be 25%. I have no idea. For me, to the extent that I am aware of trans issues, I've covered them in the past, but as the election's gotten tighter, yes, it's been more focused on policies. It's been Republican legislation that's been the bane of trans people in this country. It's 100 anti-trans legislation or 100 anti-trans bills in 2021, then going to 200 in 2022, now 500 in 2024. I think the primary culprit is the GOP. And to the extent that there are people on Twitter who are useful idiots that the GOP can weaponize and say, see, this person says this crazy shit and they've got, X number of likes or whatever. I think it suggests that the idea is we must somehow silence all the crazy people in a mass movement comprised of tens, if not hundreds of millions of people. And it's not possible.
That's not what I'm asking.
Well,
That's
wait
not
a
what
minute.
I'm asking for. Yeah, finish. I'm sorry.
Well, then I'm not sure what you want from me, because I see it as there will always be crazy people in our movement, as there is in every movement. The question is,
please don't take this as a
Sure.
personal kind of. It's not. I'm not angry specifically at you. I think you do fine.
Sure.
You do better than me in a lot of ways, right? At what you do. But what I'm talking about, right? What I'm speaking to is this general tendency for people on the left who are more center, who are more, big D Democrat, to just cede any kind of talking points to the fringe. And I think that we need to. I don't think we can silence them, but I think we can just make it very clear, and more clear than we have, that they're just the crazies. They're actually not a part of us. We're not going to pander them to all. They can go get fucked. That's it. Right. And I want to get to the super chats. I got to make a little money. So let me get through these super chats and then we'll get back into the discussion.
Sure.
Okay. You guys okay with that?
Sure.
Okay. $2 from Testicle Johnson. Should all beaches be nude beaches? Why or why not? Okay.
I'm thinking not. I've seen people on beaches and would prefer that they remain clothed.
Fair enough. $5 from Harmony Ginger to say, Brianna, you did a great on the show. I don't always agree with you, but you spoke your mind and conducted yourself well. Don't be down on yourself. So thank you for the $5. $2 from Keto Burrito. I like Brianna for reaching across. Wish more did. $2 more from Keto Burrito. Whick, stop letting Sunday attack Pondering's cam. Fair enough. $10. I think that was a joke.
Damn you, Sunday. Are we referring to President Sunday? Damn you,
pretty sure.
Mr. President.
$10 from Per Thompson to say, Brianna, how does the law promote this perv from going into a women's bathroom and flashing women? I really don't understand what the law does to help this sick person. I'll let you address that real quick. We got one more, but yeah.
It's super quick. This is the very problem. Because of the soft power employed by the fringe, we cannot have a public policy discussion about what it should be for changing your gender. Right? Should we go back to, you've got to get the, what used to be called the Benjamins or the WPATH standards, where you get therapy, you're certified with gender dysphoria, your therapist writes a letter, and then you use that to start unlocking the doors? Or to be more friendly to non-binary people, should we have it where it's just on the honor system? We literally cannot have that discussion. This is my entire point. Like, this is leading to bad public policy, or at the very least under-considered public policy.
Okay. And then finally, $20 from Lawson Harrison to say, I would bet that if we figure out how to divorce self-ID from transgender rights, that would resolve 90% of the general public's hesitations. Thank you. Oh my God, they attacked you again, Josiah. But back to the matter at hand. And gang, thank you for the money. If you like,
I'm listening. I'm gonna try to fuck with the setting, but I've got my mic here.
Yeah, and I guess, look, I've talked a lot of shit on you, Josiah, so I feel like I need to give you the mic for a moment and let you castigate me a little bit. Your camera's back, by the way. I don't know what you did, but
yeah, I wonder if it's like set. I thought I had it set to 1080p instead of 4K. That might be the issue. It's like it's just burning out at 4K.
Yeah, but I wanted to because I know that we've had these discussions before, and I don't want this to be just kind of a one-sided thing. So please, if you have.
It's not felt one-sided. So listen, again, I would prefer a concrete proposal about what you would like from people like me, people who are more focused on the Republicans or on the right than the left, and then I can decide whether or not this is something that's reasonable. For me, because again, I understand how it comes off to you. To me, it comes off like I should spend all or half my time dealing with an issue that I don't think is all or even half the problem. That's a problem for me. If I think the GOP is 70% of the problem politically in this country, the modern Republican Party, then I should dedicate at least 70% of the time to confronting it. I just do not agree respectfully with the idea of focusing so much more on the disagreements or the conflicts on my side than the opposing side, if I believe the opposing side is the bigger problem. Sure. So that's where I would like to go into more.
I'll give you my response to that, and sure. I'll let after I do, I'm going to give the mic to Wu because I'm sure she has thoughts as well. But here's my
This is I'm listening. Yeah, I'm still fucking with the
understand. This is my thought process here. Okay, is that I understand that the Republicans are much more of a problem, but the problem is Republicans don't listen to me. Democrats do. And I want to not only address the problems, right, in a proportional thing, but also address them in a way that I can be proportionally successful at. And I feel like an episode of mine that has a come to Jesus moment with the people on the left who also may be seeing some of these extremists go off and letting them know that, hey, you don't have to worry. Not all of us are like those extremists out there. That's not the Democratic Party. That's not what progressive is. They're not us. And giving a better example for people who are shaky, who are floundering, who are like, oh, I don't know if I can be associated with this anymore. I think I have much more likelihood to have an impact than if I spent all day yelling at Trump voters. I mean, they're just not going to listen to me.
I think that because we talked about this before, and this is the last thing I'll say. I'll let you have the last word, and then Brianna can say what she has to say. But we've had this conversation before, and I thought, unless I'm mistaken, you eventually conceded that your audience was more right wing than you thought initially.
It is.
So I don't think it's fair to say.
But they're not MAGA voters.
I understand, but my point is, I think it's a good opportunity. If I had an audience that was, again, let's just use the centrist moniker. This is my beef with somebody like Constantine or, others as well who say that they're centrist. Well, if that's true, then you should actually spend time criticizing the right and left. If you are a centrist who criticizes the left, you are a right winger. You're just a dishonest one, right? That's why I try to be very open about my partisan and ideological leanings. It's not that I think the left is perfect. And believe it or not, even in my videos, I've criticized President Biden and the Biden administration because I disagree with certain strategic decisions that they've made. I disagree with certain policy decisions that they've made. But at the end of the day, Biden at his worst day is just objectively better for me than Trump at his best. And I'll never make that false equivalence. So to your point, Whick, I understand where you think you carry more of an audience and you carry more attention from the left, ergo it's worth your time to try to critique the left to get it to better itself. But I think based on your audience breakdown, you have that influence on the right and say, hey, Republicans.
Well, this helps with the center right too, and I'll respond. Then we're going to get the right to Wu, but this helps with the center right too because there's a lot of people like Counterpoints is a great example. He's on the right, he's a right winger, but he's not going to vote for Trump, and I think that reaching out to those people and letting people who are iffy on Trump who are on the right see that there's quote unquote sane Democrats, sane progressives. I think that does wonders. And this is just a disagreement on like I don't have a study right in front of me.
Yeah, but I get along with Connor. So where's the disagreement there? I get along with Connor. I say fuck you to him, but that's because
Connor's
he's a 40K
Counterpoints is very agreeable
he's a
very agreeable individual if you come at him the right way. But I will say, right, that like there are people in my audience who dislike you, Josiah, but who like me.
No shit.
Yeah. I don't know if you noticed, right?
I am aware.
Do you understand? Like there's this we all have different people that we will do better with. And I think that like you do great in your sphere, but I just wish you would help me more in mine. But that's all. But Wu, let's give it to her.
This is what I want to say. So Whick can back me up. I just dropped this Pew poll in DMs with him. It wouldn't let me put it in the chat where you could see it, Josiah. So in September of 2017, there's a question like, do you think that your gender can be different from the sex you were assigned at birth or is determined by your sex you were assigned at birth? In September of 2017, that was 45% of people saying it could be different to 53%. It has gone down and down and down and down as we've let the fringe run the trans movement, which has happened very heavily in the last 7 years. And today, 2 out of 3 people believe that you can't, trans people are not real, they don't change their gender, and only 1 in 3 people think that, right? This is a disaster for the trans movement. And it directly ties into the public policy that trans people can expect, like access to health care, access to having insurance pay for surgeries like SRS or FFS. So respectfully, your question was, do I have to do this? My answer is no. You don't have to call out the fringe left. This is, I kind of think about activism like an RPG party. You would probably be more of a white mage out there healing the Democrats and trying to keep us healthy and unified and moving along. But some of us, no one has been calling out this crazy fringe dude. And because of that, now 2 out of 3 voters don't even think trans people are real. That is disastrous for trans people. It has a real world impact in public policy. So if you don't want to do that job and you don't do that job, because I checked your YouTube before I came on, that's fine. It's your prerogative. You can choose what to do with your own career. But this is incredibly important to me. This is the #1 issue that I care about. And someone has got to fucking do this.
Well, it's the second, right? Because remember, democracy is first, and then as far as like
Sure,
major
fair
policy
enough.
issues,
Fair
yeah.
enough. Yes.
So okay, I am not a
But it's
gamer.
very
I'm gonna
valuable.
try to use
Very
this
valuable.
metaphor, and you
Yes.
tell me if
Oh,
I'm
no.
fucking it up.
Oh, no. Okay,
Shut
here we
up,
go.
Wick. I'm gonna try this. Okay, listen. All right, you're right. I would be the cleric healing the party or whatever.
This is painful. Go on.
Shut up. Listen, I'm gonna get to it, but you would okay. But Brianna, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but I'm saying like correct me if I'm wrong. But you also don't want to be the member of the party shooting other members of your party, right? Even if like you let's say you're playing with a noob like me, you'd be like Josiah, you gotta do this differently. You got to do this differently. But you ultimately agree that at the end you zap the lasers at the enemy, the opponent, which in this case would be the right?
I would say it's like the Dark Knight mechanic in Final Fantasy XIV, where you
fuck,
sacrifice
man.
some of your health. You
fucked up,
sacrifice some
Josiah.
of your health to make the entire party stronger. That's what I want to do. I want to sacrifice that 1 or 2% on the fringe and marginalize them so we can get many, many more times those votes from the 42% of independents. That's
Is it
what
possible? Is it possible, again, using this metaphor, that you inadvertently make the opponent stronger?
I think it's possible. Of course it is. Of course it is. But I mean, again, look at this poll. Like, this is where the public policy is going. This is why these bills are finding such salience in state legislatures. So this needs an answer.
Listen, again, I do not and have not quibbled. This is a constant tension that Stephen and I have. Is because Stephen is more open than I am to swing left. But I think, and I understand you highlighted the differences, which is that he is a man operating in this space. He's afforded more generosity than a woman. I take all that at face value. But I also know that you respect Stephen and that you mended fences with Stephen. I think that to the extent that you are able, the extent that you are permitted, I think that adopting more of a page from his book, which is that he did it with Triggernometry. He did it with, he does it with people that he talks to, the twins that he recently had the conversation with, whose name is the Hodge twins.
Yeah.
He agreed when there was points of disagreement, but he never permitted this a false equivalence or this notion or this criticism of the left to go unaddressed. I feel that he was able to dig his ground in. That to me is just the difference. It's just, and I also understand that maybe if I were in that position, Brianna, it would also be really fucking hard for me to, in the moment, disagree with the opposition, because I feel it would potentially burn a bridge. I'm sympathetic to all that. I just still say at the end of the day, to the extent that attacks matter in your RPG, the lasers, the fireball, they should be directed predominantly at the opponent. And in my case, and I believe in your case too, that is still the right. You should be shooting fireballs more at the right.
So I want to be generous to you now and say, look, this is something I've thought a lot about lately. I have gotten an ungodly amount of abuse from the fringe left following October 7th. I've reported more death threats to law enforcement than I can even count at this time, as many as I did during Gamergate. The attacks on my integrity happen daily, and it's really, really hard for me not to be resentful about that. I think something I've been really struggling with lately is, am I letting that anger do to me what it did to J.K. Rowling and Dave Chappelle, where they got so angry at those people that were attacking them so much, they developed some really shitty politics? I don't think I have, but I've been thinking about that a lot. So I think your point is really taken. What I think the difference is, you mentioned Piers Morgan. I'm going to be going on Piers Morgan soon about a very contentious issue. And I intend to go on there guns blazing because Piers Morgan loves an argument. That's the one suggestion Jank gave me when I was talking to him about it. He loves to argue. That's his favorite thing. So I'm going to give him one. I'm fine with that. My interpretation with Constantine and talking to him and Francis before the show was looking for that middle ground. I just thought it was the better tactic in the moment. So anyone that has seen me on Whick knows I have no problem going aggro if it's called for. I think your criticism is fair, I just want credit that I did build a bridge there. And I can show you hundreds of emails showing it. I did put a different face on the Democratic Party
Two things.
than a lot of his audience had seen.
Yeah, I want to get your side of the mic to respond, but then you said something in the middle there that I really want to ask you about.
Don't forget it, Whick.
Yeah,
do not forget it. So,
Sure.
so to your point about the bridge, Brianna, again, if you're getting these emails from Triggernometry fans saying that they have moved more leftward because of your appearance there, I can't contest that, and I'm not going to. I do think, as I said to you privately, a week ago or however long ago it was, and even now during this conversation, I do think, you did attempt to build a bridge. I just don't think they met you in the middle of that bridge. They stayed on the other end. That's it. And so to use a crude analogy, at a certain point, it's almost like, get your ass over here. I met you halfway. I am doing, to the extent that I believe that these are sincere, legitimate disagreements with my side of the aisle, I have shown you, Constantine and Francis, good faith. Now, unless you think the right is perfect, show me a little good faith, and let's talk about the election denialism of MAGA. Let's talk about how the Republicans have an objectively worse record on Ukraine. You mentioned, yes, a great question to Constantine and Francis when you said, do you think that the Republicans have been compromised by Russia? And he immediately dismissed it. But you know who hasn't dismissed it? Republican congresspeople like Michael McCall has said his own party has been infiltrated. And so it's like Constantine, and I understand you would phrase this much more gently, but a guy who knows the Republican Party far better than you do, Constantine, an actual Republican, has said his party has been infiltrated by Russia. So are you prepared to grapple with that? The idea that there are some areas that the Republican Party is just deficient compared to Democrats? What will you give me in return? That's it. I think you built a bridge. I think you did the work. They didn't do any of it. You met them halfway on that bridge, and they stayed on the other side. And I do think that's a problem. And I think
can I just say something here really quickly?
Yeah.
And this is an honest question. How much major media have you done in your career?
None.
Okay, so this is something I have learned because I've done a lot of major media. The most important hit is the first one because you really want to focus on the producer particularly, and really making sure you make it super easy for the producer to book you. You want to, and then after that first hit, that's when you can get a little bit more aggro. But it's opening up that door that first time. So I think, like, in all seriousness, I'm sure I'll go back on again.
That's
and
good.
I think it will be a different kind of tenor because, their audience likes me. It did good numbers. It got a lot of buzz. I think there's value in kind of holding that once you have a good relationship established, because you don't want to be the asshole going on a show guns blazing and blowing it all up.
Yeah, you don't want to begin the conversation when they're like, hi, Brianna, how are you? And you're like, fuck you, you piece of shit, right? Yeah. And listen, and again, if you think you're going to go back on, if you're going to try to go back on, I hope that you act in such a way as to make it clear to them that they need to reciprocate. Good faith, this is the thing Whick and I've talked about before, good faith cannot be one-sided. By definition, if you and I are having a conversation and you act in good faith, Brianna, and I don't, by definition, we had a bad faith conversation because it must be reciprocated. And same thing with charity. And I just don't think they did that for you. But hopefully in the future, they will, and you'll have a chance to push them more and defend the left in the areas that you think the left must be defended, and attack the right where you think the right should be attacked.
Did you see me on Tim Pool? I think no one would say I wasn't very aggressive for that.
No, so if you recall, so it's funny. It's funny you say that because actually, yes, if you remember, you and I had a private conversation briefly about your exchange on Tim Pool. I think that the Tim Pool, again, in my opinion, armchair quarterbacking was a much better showing for you because you were charitable with Tim to the extent that I think Steven has tried to, Vosh has tried to, and you also push back more frequently. And has he ever talked about having you back on?
Yeah, I'll be back on soon.
Good for you. Okay, so yes, I that is an example of where I think that it was from my recollection and from my recollection of our conversation at the time, that was a much more balanced conversation where you dug your heels in much more often. I think it was to the betterment of the left because you represented them. Yeah.
But his audience liked me a lot less. I think that's worth
I bet.
So,
I fucking bet. Yeah. I bet. Yeah.
I got less emails saying you changed my mind. So
yeah.
Well, different.
And again, I can't compete with that. So at the end of the day, listen, if you've got evidence that you've moved people, like Steven talks about this before, how him going on this channel, that channel. He's gotten emails and responses from people saying, "Hey, listen, I appreciate your reasonable approach." Then fair enough. I can just tell you what it looked like to me. So at the end of the day, it's a judgment call.
We did have a super chat earlier saying that exact thing, that that the respect there, because, and this is what I want to highlight, I think, in these kinds of conversations, and this is just a general overall statement, right, is that people have to respect you before they're going to believe you. They have to believe that what you are saying is going to be genuine and honest before they take you seriously. You can have all the facts at your disposal, but if they just think you're an asshole and don't like you, they're just not going to listen. And that's the unfortunate part. Like, would it be better if people just used logic and facts and reason? Probably, but they don't. That's not how people work. And asking people to just take your word for it and take your word for all these facts and things like that without at least making that pill swallowable, I think that's a failure, right? A lot of left-wing commentators, me included, right, fail at this too often, is that we want to shove it down the enemy's throat. And they're obviously going to fight against that. But if you can make the pill much more soft, a spoonful of sugar helps medicine go down, right? And I think that we could apply that to most of our conversations. Now, there are certain people where I don't care if they gag when I'm trying to shove it down their throat, right? Like pills down their throat. But, stop. I regretted that phrasing almost immediately. Okay, but you know what I mean? Like, there's some people like I just don't want on my team at all, and they can go get fucked. But for people I'm trying to actually work with, who I believe are honest actors and are genuine people, I will use all the sugar I need to get them to swallow that pill. Let me touch on, and we're not going to go too much longer, right? I know we got places to be, but I wanted to touch on something Brianna said, and I want to get your thoughts on this, because you mentioned it, and you mentioned it's something you think about it, but I wanted to talk about it more generally because I think it's very important. You mentioned that one of the worries that you have is that you are being negatively polarized. And what I mean by that is that you're being pushed into contrarian stances because of the just rabid hate that you get from certain sectors. And I think Dave Chappelle and J.K. Rowling were two people you mentioned for that. Yeah. So I wanted to interrogate that a little bit more, because I think we should all acknowledge that this is a thing that happens. And none of us are immune to this. None of us are immune to being negatively polarized. So can I ask you, Brianna, what are some ways that you have tried to protect yourself from this kind of thing? Because you get this probably more than me, more than Josiah, more than anyone that I've talked to, right? You get this so much. So what mechanisms, what habits have you employed to keep yourself from just going full, like, oh, you hate me? Okay, fuck you. I'm going to turn against everything you stand for, right?
Well, I mean, I put out a tweet, that got a lot of, it actually got me a lot of unfollows this weekend, saying like, hey, look, just so you know, I'm voting for Biden, y'all. I will never vote for Trump. The election denialism is a hard line. So I try to make the case for Democrats really consistently. I think a lot of it is the self-awareness. And I think if you look at my Twitter right now, I think probably too high a percentage of it is critiquing the fringe left. I do have to say, my motivation in talking so much about anti-Semitism is 100% about getting Joe Biden elected. I think if Democrats are not out there making the case that this bullshit is not acceptable, I don't think Jews are going to stand with us. I just flat out don't believe it. So, that is about me trying to save the party. But I think it's just being aware that this can radicalize you and trying to, stand with your values, right? I think particularly as we get closer to the election, I think you're going to see more and more of my Twitter talking, making the case for Democrats, if that makes sense.
No, it does, and I hope that's the case. I know I worry about myself in this.
Yeah.
Right? I worry that, especially with things like Israel-Palestine, that the overwhelming amount of crazy on the Palestinian side, I really try to not let it color the realization that Israel has a lot of fucking problems. They do some
Yeah.
fucking horrible shit.
Yep.
And I'm just, again, just from a personal kind of perspective, what are some things that you feel like you have been unfair to people on? Let's do a come to Jesus moment here with both of us. In what ways do you think you've maybe been unfair to people who maybe snapped when you shouldn't have? Do you feel like there are any examples of that you'd like to talk about? I'm just curious.
Like offhand right now, I mean, I lose my temper sometimes. That's my character flaw as a person. I've done it
Fair
on your
enough.
show before. No, I do want to say something I think is different about me than you, Wick, is
Fair.
I've famously gotten it from both sides. You know, I came to prominence from getting this stuff from the alt-right. Yeah, I've gotten it from the left. I think that really has created a, like I put a very high, importance on speaking my mind and standing up for what I believe is right. But, at the same time, like, I think sometimes, like, I think that I see the siren allure of turning against all these people. And I just try to be cognizant of that and remind myself that, at the end of the day, Democrats need to win.
Gotcha. Josiah, well, I'm curious for you. I'm wondering, like, because again, you have a much less of a Twitter presence than Brianna Wu, but I am curious.
Or you, for that matter. Yeah.
To what extent do you find yourself getting maybe negatively polarized against people who would otherwise be on your team, if at all? Right? This may not apply to you. Right?
Believe it or not, I have gotten critiques from people on the left before. I imagine they happen less frequently than either of you two. But so Cody Johnston of Some More News had this really funny tweet a long time ago where he said something like, the left got a little too PC, so I changed my position on healthcare, the military, foreign policy, domestic policy, blah, blah. He's making fun of people like who do the I left the left thing. And so one of the things I've tried to take from heart from the very beginning is, number one, I do sincerely believe in a progressive agenda and that the Republicans are the immediate obstacle. And like when I made this, when I tweeted the tweet that you made, Wick, for today's event, I had at least one person I saw in my mentions go off on me the fact that I'm having a conversation with Brianna, and I just ignored it. Now, it's easy for me to do because it's not like my mentions are being flooded with it. But when it's happened in the past, I either ignore it or I respond with an okay, like a lowercase okay. And the way I look at it is, I'm going to be an ally to the left, even if the left doesn't fucking want it. Like if I ever get to the point where I drive, like I said, I have a pretty good rapport with the guys at the Vanguard and I do like them, but it's entirely possible that between now and the election, they'll be so pissed off about my pro-electoral go reelect Biden no matter what, situation, because I think, a Democrat would be better in that position than a Republican. I will be an ally of the Vanguard, whether the Vanguard wants it or not. I will be an ally of the left, whether the left wants it or not. I will not allow them. They cannot kick me out of this. I will bear hug them in love and say, listen, I will never turn to the right.
Got you. Okay, great.
I will never turn to the right no matter how much you hate me. Because I do sincerely hold these principles, and also because I think it's a fun way to annoy these people. So it's kind of like that. But it's also easy for me to say now because it's entirely possible that if I had 500,000 Twitter followers and I was just getting inundated in this shit from my side, my views may change. But as of right now, that's how I've gone.
Do you get death threats regularly? Do people tell you they're going to rape you? Do you get child pornography sent to you? I get that all the time, man.
I've had 2 death threats sent to me through YouTube, right? Such that they were like, when I came back to it, they were auto-moderated.
Oh, hey, look,
out.
I just had a guy accusing me of raping women in my channel right now as we're talking, right? So yeah, I got you. Go ahead.
But Brianna, that's what I'm saying. It's entirely possible that I would feel much more bitter about it or have the temptation to really be galvanized by it if I were inundated the way that you are. But
it's not that I think I'm bitter. It's that I think for whatever reason, I have for whatever reason, there are a lot of people that really, really love me, and there are some people that just hate me. It's very similar to Destiny, right? So at this point, I'm just damaged from all of it, to be really honest with you,
Sure.
and I can just tune it out. So, you know, I guess I'm just saying it's easy to say that. That's how you would respond. I think if it actually happened to you, I think you might feel a little differently. So,
Which is precisely what I said. That is precisely what I said, that if my circumstances were different, I might feel differently. But the way I've been trying to go about it from the beginning is basically frame it in my mind that no matter what, I will try to
These are your
cling to these
principles.
principles. Yeah, no matter
Can
what. But yeah,
can I
it's
ask you
easy to say.
just real quick, because I know we got to
Sure.
go and I want to wrap up a little bit. But I want to ask both of you first this final question, and then if either of you have questions for me or questions for each other, we can ask those, and then we'll wrap it up. But final question to you both: what would you consider your core foundational principles, right? Morally, politically, etc. When someone asks you, like, what principles are the most important to you, how would you answer? And I want Josiah first, then we'll pass it to Wu, and then, yeah.
I would say trying to democratize as much as possible. Try to strive for a society which gets as close to equality as possible, or at least presents that opportunity optimally. Doing so requires enshrining minority rights in there as well, and also just civil rights in general, freedom of speech, freedom of religion. Basically, trying to create a society that everybody is on as much of an even footing as possible. And then from there, they go from there, but one that, looks out for the least among us. Yeah, those are principles that I hold pretty dear.
I think politics change and what is important changes. Like in the Bush era, stopping the Iraq War was something I considered a top priority. Today, it is, safeguarding trans rights. So, it's not so much a policy as much as I think it's integrity. It really amazes me how little people talk about integrity. And Wick, you served in the military, so I know you get this. I came from a military family, and we talked about that all the damn time growing up. So being truthful to your word, being honest in how you represent things, standing up for what you believe, trying to think about your actions and make sure that you're being reasonable and fair, that is my highest principle. And, what I want by the end of my career, I hope to have done enough to have an obit in the New York Times. And I'm sure it's going to be all over the map, but we'll talk about Gamergate. We'll talk about the work I'm doing now. And I really hope that obit will say that I'm someone that had integrity in what I said, and I wasn't afraid to challenge people. That's what's really important to me.
Excellent. Well, do either of you have questions or something to bring up that we haven't discussed yet?
I have a question, Josiah. So what do you think, this is a really tough election.
Yeah.
And I believe that if Trump wins, one of the whispers I'm hearing from the people that work in anti-trans politics is one of the first things they're going to do is basically sign bills to make the liability for providing gender-affirming care, to make that extremely expensive, which is going to result in people stopping access to gender-affirming care. So I think trans rights are really on the ballot this election. What responsibility do you feel for trans people, and how does that reflect in the career choices that you make?
Yeah, so I think as somebody who supports trans rights, I think it's important for anybody who is on the left or supports the Democratic Party to try to be, number one, as inclusive as possible and defend against the excesses and the overreaches of anti-trans Republican legislation. I covered the increasing, I don't want to say by orders of magnitude, but substantially increasing raft of anti-trans legislation coming out of states, again, beginning in 2021, going up to 2023. And then it just kind of like lost focus in my coverage as I focus more on like the horse race and electoral politics. But yeah, I think we have an obligation to protect marginalized groups. And I think you'd easily make the case that trans people are the most marginalized group in the country, So yeah, I think that we have a duty to win, and I think we have a duty to protect against anti-trans legislation from all comers.
I think that's fair.
But also, As far as what Trump would do specifically, what's interesting is I don't know the extent to which Trump himself, and I imagine you feel the same way as anti-trans. I just feel he's a malignant narcissist. He probably thinking, what the hell is trans, right? Like he was just educated about this 3 days ago or 3 years ago. I think he is a proxy for ideologically motivated people who really want to harm that community. And that's another reason why I think it's important to not just defeat him for the presidency, but you also have to retake the House. And you also have to keep the Senate. And it's a brutal map, particularly for the Senate, because they need only to win 2 seats.
Yeah.
So we have to win a trifecta. And then, of course, then we have to deal with the final boss of American democracy at the moment, which is this right-wing Supreme Court. Because even if you protect things at the federal level, and let's say that you have a sufficiently motivated Democratic majority to enshrine trans protections into federal law, which would, of course, supersede state law, states will challenge it. It'll be granted cert in front of the court, and then there's no fucking telling how that court will decide. They may strike down a federal congressional law which enshrines anti-trans legislation. So to me, this is the real obstacle. This is something I complain about a lot with Whick, which is it's not enough to get Biden reelected, which itself is going to be challenging. Got to take back the House, keep the Senate, and do something about this court, rein this court in, because they're, even with just the trifecta in terms of the House, the Senate, and the presidency. Yeah,
we can have that fight another day. Right?
So I'm just saying to Brianna, I agree that it's going to be perilous and incredibly complicated and incredibly challenging, and I don't think it's enough to just win the presidency.
I hear what you're saying, and I think that's really fair. This is part of why I get so irritated at the anti-electoralism, particularly from the fringe Palestine people. I really feel like they would sacrifice American democracy just to, frankly, poke a stick in the eye of the Zionists that believe Israel should exist. I think a lot of them would do that. And so I hear what you're saying, and I agree with you. That's the top priority. But I think at the same time, there's got to be some bold leadership that is willing to go out there and to refocus the discussion on public policy that makes sense, that is sellable to a wider electorate. I think that's a really thankless job. And, Whick, to your credit, I think you have those kinds of discussions on your show. I appreciate it when you have it. And I think we need more of that. If I could wave my magic wand and fire every single quote unquote leader in the trans rights movement right now, I would do that. They've steered the entire thing into a cliff. So, in my estimation, this kind of work, going out to Tim Pool's audience and Triggernometry and talking to Lauren Southern and going on Piers Morgan and trying to present a less radical, more public policy focused version of the trans movement, I think that's one of the very top priorities we should be doing. So that's how I feel.
I want to read these last 3 super chats, and then I want to give each of you some closing thoughts, and then we'll just kind of wrap it up.
Sure.
And I know you guys got places to go. And I want to thank you both for having this conversation. I know it can be fraught at times, and I hope that we've navigated it well, and I hope the listeners, my audience, can take away something from this discussion, right? Let's get to these super chats, and then we'll get to the closing thoughts.
Sure.
$5 from AKA Batausi. Whick, can you ask Pondering to give 3 policy positions he agrees with that are on the right?
Ooh.
That are on the right. More moderate ones. No, I don't think any of the policy prescriptions that even I would define as moderate would belong to the right. There's nothing about the current Republican Party agenda with which I agree. Like, I was even tempted to say, okay, voter ID, for example. The problem is what Republicans want for voter ID is incomplete. I have no issue, if it would alleviate some concerns, many of which I believe are bad faith, about stolen elections or whatever, but they would want to throw as many obstacles into voter ID as possible. You got to order, you got to go in person, you got to stand on one foot, you got to take this like.
Yeah, let me rephrase the question perhaps to kind of get it. What are 3 concerns that right-wing people have that you are sympathetic to? How's that?
I am sympathetic. I don't know if there's a policy consideration, but I am sympathetic to this idea that half of this country hates the country, that patriotism is the exclusive province of the right. I think it's perfectly reasonable to love this country and love living in this country and also want it to be better. I would say that's a concern. I would say even this idea that the Democrats have become out of touch, which is actually a criticism that's been levied at them for decades, that they're the elitist party, that they're the party of the elite. I don't totally agree with it, but I understand where they're coming from. But I also think that that's something that's not reciprocated. I think that actually there's attempts by Democrats, certainly elected Democrats, to try to appeal to the right more than there are attempts by the Republicans to understand and appeal to the left. So those are concerns as well. I would also say the need for a strong military. I know that that's something that is often disavowed by elements of the left, but I don't want the United States of America to become the second most militarily powerful country on earth. I want us, and I say this as somebody who lives in this country, so perhaps I'd feel differently if I lived in a different country, but I want the United States to maintain military supremacy. But I also think that the DoD can't pass an audit and hasn't for years. So I also don't believe that we have to pay as much as we do into our military budget to maintain our edge over other powers as well. But those are three concerns off the top of my head that are right-leaning. But I really need to be clear about this. I can't say that it's full-throated endorsement of their position because I think it's incomplete and more nuanced than that.
$10 from the Justice 35. I think Josiah's problem is that he doesn't understand practical politics and how absolutely deranged culture war issues are. Easy layups to the right, and that congressional repubs are good at the job. Do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, so I think that this is why you see Republicans traffic in culture war issues and culture war. And this is funny. It's interesting that that this is brought up because Brianna talks about this in our conversation with the Triggernometry folks, and I actually thought she made a pretty good point that Constantine clearly didn't like, and there was a bit of a walk back there, but which is they focus on culture war issues, I think to the detriment of policy. I think that the way I put it on my channel, not to be too blasé about it, but culture war issues encompass questions about patriotism, which I told you I'm sympathetic towards, but also notions of, damn, the green M&M is wearing flats instead of high heels. This is something to swing the, this is something that, exactly. Like, I don't have any patience for that. I think it's fucking stupid, and I'll never validate that. Okay. So it depends on what you mean by culture war issues. I think that the broader advantage that Republicans have is that they are able to hyperfixate on these relatively niche issues. Not all of them are relatively niche, but a lot of them, and they're able to blow it up. Look at the gas stove thing, for example. Remember, it was wildly, propagated by Republican politicians that Joe Biden's coming for my gas stove. No, he's not. Its safety emission standards have been in place rigorously since George W. Bush, famous non-woke guy, right? And so they're focusing on this
now too, but go ahead.
Right, and also Governor DeSantis in Florida passed, the statewide credit that if you get a gas stove, the state will help pay for it, even though like 95% of stoves in Florida are not gas. This is the shit that they traffic in, because when it comes to questions about healthcare and democracy and stuff like that, they tend to be on the losing side. So, yeah, I know that they're skilled at exploiting it, but I don't know what you want from me. Sure. I can't validate some of these things.
And $10 follow-up from the same person, Justice 35, $10 follow-up to say, when I say good job, I mean politically. Conservatives are right about trans, sports, crime, and immigration. Dems are too nerdy and too cosmopolitan to acknowledge conservative concerns about the government. Thank you.
So can I use that as an example? So that's
quickly,
that's a great
because I know everyone's got to go, and I
I was just gonna say, so like even on the crime, we have the stats on this, and I know people say, well, the FBI stats are incomplete, but there have been surveys done as well to boost this. Jeff Asher, crime analyst, has a great blog about this. That even when you pull sources or data from different sources, it confirms the trend. Crime is dropping. So no, Republicans are dead wrong about that. Trans issues in sports, again, it's not like this is not my area of expertise, but my understanding is that's like 100 people in a 330 million person nation. And it's such an egregious culture war niche issue that even the Republican governor of Utah vetoed an anti-trans bill that was aimed about trans people in sports because he's like, guys, this is way too broad for such a niche issue. What the fuck? So no, even that, I'm sorry, I disagree. There may be some culture war issues out there, but I don't think crime and trans people in sports is one of them.
One of the things that I'd like to pick your brain on someday, another day, is when it comes to crime, bail reform and things like that.
Ooh,
Because
that did not work out super well.
Yeah, there's been some stories about this, and so when we say things like crime, I think that there should be a discussion. Like if I was going to have, if I had to say one more right-leaning position that I hold is I think that ideas towards like defunding the police, bail reform, and these things are dangerous, and I think they have bad outcomes. But I won't get into that. $5 from Zephyr Hash. Let's get these new Triggernometry viewers in a bridge building. Brianna greater than Whick, who is greater than Josiah, who's greater than Progressive Brianna Pipeline. Thank you for the $5. And $2 from the Justice 35 to say incorrect. You're dead wrong about crime. Well, maybe you can fight another time.
Is that the guy who said the first couple things?
Yeah.
Maybe he meant what you meant, which is about bail reform. If you mean crime rates are dropping, no, I'm right and you're wrong. Get over it.
Okay, well, gang, it's been great. I want to give these two a lovely outro, and again, thank you. Tomorrow I have off. I'm gonna do other things. We got some great shows coming up next week. Monday, I'm gonna have a call-in show with Bronwyn, who's a D&D nerd, gaming nerd. Should be fun. You can call in. Tuesday, we're gonna be talking about the Manosphere. That should be fun. And then Wednesday, I have a debate with Lucy Hayes on Dungeons and Dragons and their new org stuff. And last but not least, Thursday night are the presidential debates between Trump and Biden. And I'm going to be watching that with Daniela, who was on my show a few weeks ago. She's a former Turning Point USA employee, and Econo Boy, and anyone else I can get to come with me. So that should be fun. We'll have a watch party, and then we're gonna have after.
Pop on by for that.
if you'd love to. And directly after, I want to have like a reaction panel, for people from all sides to sit down and say how to go, right? I think that'd be fun. Tune in next week, but let's give the mic to first Josiah and then to Brianna Wu. Closing thoughts, where can people find you, etc. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm Josiah with Pondering Politics. It's a YouTube political commentary channel. The overall thesis is that Democrats are imperfect, but just objectively better as a political party than the current GOP because it's an authoritarian cult of personality with no limiting principle. I think Republicans should lose every goddamn election in this country until they have a collective timeout and reformat and distance themselves from the authoritarian populism of Trump. I appreciate this conversation. Like I said, Brianna and I have had a friendly civil history. I hope to continue it, but we do disagree on certain tactics. I do not fault her at all for having conversations with Triggernometry and Lauren Southern. I think that there's serious potential for meaningful, productive dialogue. But I think that she should try to guard from being overly generous and expecting nothing in return. I think it's important that they reciprocate and be made to reciprocate, or at least a good faith effort at making them attempt to reciprocate during these dialogues. And I think the Lauren Southern thing is a better opportunity than was the case in Triggernometry. Okay. But yeah, I appreciate the conversation, and vote blue in November.
Thanks
in every
for being
fucking
here.
election.
Josiah, we will fight on many things, but that we will not fight on. Okay, I'll have you on again, I'm sure, and we'll have some fun conversations. Thank you for being here, Brianna. Go ahead.
Yeah, I really enjoyed this, and no hard feelings on my side. I thought this was really productive. So I just want to stress again, Josiah, I appreciate your political project. I think it has a role. I respect that. It doesn't have to be my political project to have value. I think what I want to close on is saying something. I'm not sure if this is true, but I think it could be a future for the country. I think there are a lot of Connors out there. Connor is old school Republican, doesn't have an issue with gay people, thinks the state of Florida should invest more in making it so he can have a family, and, thinks the government should play a role with that. But he also believes in military and guns and all that kind of stuff. I think there are actually a lot of Connors out there in the Republican Party. And I don't assume that just because someone's on the right that they're my enemy and they don't love the country. I actually think that there could be a coalition that's starting to grow in this country as MAGA goes crazy and Free Palestine goes crazy, where those of us that just want things like our cops to have funding, our schools to work, our justice system to be fair, our border to like be secure, like this stuff that really isn't left versus right, it's just common sense. I actually think that there is a growing electorate out there that really agrees with that. And I think that large number of independents that vote that way is strong evidence for that. So, yeah, at the end of the day, if I have to choose between a Republican or a Democrat representing me, I'm going to vote Democrat. But what has changed in my thinking is I don't think every Republican is my enemy. And I think there's a ton of value in talking to them with respect and finding out what we agree on, because like that's how democracy works. And I think I'm good at that, and I think it's a job I'm going to continue doing.
Well, thank you for being here, gang. Like I said, we're gonna have some great shows next week. Thank you for being here. We're gonna raid out on Twitter. We're gonna go to Admiral Gibbs, or not Twitter. On Twitch, we're gonna go to Admiral Gibbs and ha ha ha, all you losers who try to get me banned. Ha ha ha. Okay, and then on YouTube, we're gonna go to Short Fat Otaku. So I'll see you guys later, and bye bye. Wait, bye everyone.
Bye.
Bye bye bye. Oh, and $2 from Testicle Johnson. All children should be raised trans. Well,
No.
thank you.
No.
$2.
No.
Okay. Bye bye,
Don't say
everyone.
that.
Okay.